AI is a civilizational technology. We now know, I think there's very little doubt now, that AI's impact to our society is transformational. This has to do with jobs. This has to do with the way governments are impacted by AI. It touches on geopolitics. And how do we wrap this around? How do we work with lawmakers? How do we work with individual citizens? How do we make sure this technology doesn't tear our society apart? How do we make sure that we use the technology to increase productivity, but also to ensure shared prosperity? These are bigger societal problems that has to do with human-centered AI. So all these concentric rings of human-centeredness are critical to today's AI age.
That was Fei-Fei Li talking about AI as a civilizational technology and why we need to center human values as we shape its future. In this episode of High Signal, Duncan Gilchrist and I speak with Fei-Fei about a remarkable journey that spans physics, neuroscience, ImageNet, and now the frontier of spatial intelligence and 3D foundation models. We start with the early days of AI, when the field was still in a winter of sorts, and walk through how Fei-Fei's work helped catalyze the deep learning revolution. We talk about curiosity as a North Star, what human-centered AI actually means in practice, and how her startup, World Labs, is reimagining how we interact with space, sensors, and machines. It's a conversation about science, responsibility, and how the next wave of AI might unfold, not just in research labs, but in society. If you enjoy these conversations, please leave us a review. Give us 5 stars, subscribe to the newsletter, and share it with your friends. Links are in the show notes. Let's now just check in with Duncan before we jump into the interview. So I'm here with Duncan from Delphina. Hey, Duncan.
Hey, Hugo. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So before we jump into the conversation with Fei-Fei, I'd just love for you to tell us a bit about what you're up to at Delphina and why we make High Signal.
At Delphina, we're building AI agents for data science. And through the nature of our work, we meet with lots of leaders in the field. And so with the podcast, we're sharing the high signal.
Totally. And we had what I found such a wonderful conversation with Fei-Fei, which we're about to get into. But I was just wondering if you could let us know what resonated with you the most.
I've spent my professional career treating AI and ML as really a performance lever. Optimize a model, move a metric, incrementally up-level a business. And Fei-Fei drops a line that gives me shivers, that AI is a civilizational technology. It's not a feature, it's not an industry, it is civilizational. Jobs, geopolitics, the social fabric itself. Today's conversation takes the opportunity and the weight of this work head on. Let's get into it.
Hey there, Fei-Fei, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Hugo. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you here. And I feel you've had such a remarkable path that includes so many different vectors and types of work, from research to entrepreneurship, education. And I'm just wondering, for you, what were some of the pivotal moments in that evolution?
Thanks for the question. I think I'm very grateful for how my career has been. And what are some of the pivotal moments? The first one is discovering my first love. And my first love was absolutely physics. And as a teenager, early teen actually, probably around 12 years old, discovering the world of physics, it was simple, right? Just mechanics, optics, electromagnetism, just opened a door that I think that fascination, that curiosity, that whimsicalness of the world of science just remained in my life ever since. So that was a pivotal moment. Another pivotal moment would be that working in AI, as in the very early days of AI, my PhD, it was pivotal in a very private way because AI was there was no fanfare of AI. The world didn't speak of AI. It was AI winter. In fact, the word AI was barely mentioned, but it was just discovering that there is a science that gets to the core of intelligence. It opens the door for me to study how intelligence works, and making intelligent machines, especially visual intelligence machines, was incredible journey, and especially the early days, the formative years. I that was very pivotal. Of course, ImageNet was a pivotal moment. It spanned for several years, from the ideation to carrying it out to enduring the lack of reception to the moment of ImageNet challenge and convolutional neural network and deep learning coming back to life with the ImageNet and GPUs. That entire journey spanning for 5 years was a incredible moment or long moment for me. And we have to fast forward, I think, at around the time of 2018, as a computer scientist and technologist and educator of AI, I had an epiphany moment that AI was no longer a private love of mine. My generation, including my own work, has brought AI to the world in a way that's more transformational and impactful than I had ever dreamed of. With great power, it comes with great consequences. It has become a civilizational technology that would both give us so much hope and opportunity, but also bring consequences that are deeply, profoundly human consequences. And that was a moment that I realized I should return to Stanford to build the Human Centered AI Institute to really study and research and promote the idea of putting human values absolutely in the center of the development of AI. So that was a moment for technologists like me to realize there's more to the science I love than the technology itself. And I'm not going to do a laundry list. Last but not the least, this newest journey I'm on, which is being an entrepreneur and forming World Labs and working at World Labs with my former students and incredible technologists in today's AI age, especially Gen AI, and creating a piece of technology and product that we feel the world hasn't seen before. And that's really exciting and fun.
That's super cool. And thank you for such a kind of thoughtful tour of so many things that have impacted you and impact you've had as well. And I'm really excited to get into human-centered AI and spatial awareness and what you're up to at World Labs. But just to recap, the journey from your first love of physics to computer vision and CNNs and ImageNet to all amazing stuff happening today in the world of AI. It's a journey and then, of course, to human-centeredness. It's a journey in complexity increase as well, right? And, of course, the world of physics is exciting and challenging, but it almost seems quaint in terms of the complexity needed to interact with and think about these systems and then approaching the human-centeredness. And I am wondering, the journey you've just described it isn't linear, but it's a well-defined path now. And I'm sure it wasn't always obvious to you, like what the signal of the path was. So I'm just wondering if you've had a personal North Star throughout the journey, or what type of things drove you and how you found the signal that allowed you to follow this journey.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo, for asking that question. A lot of young people ask me that question because in hindsight, it looked like it was linear, but it's true, especially a journey of a scientist. And I think so is the journey of an entrepreneur. You're often in the path of darkness. You're often in the path of uncertainty. There is a lot more that's unknown than known. And recently I wrote a book, The Worlds I See. And in fact, the very thesis of that book is about North Star. I would say that one absolute North Star that has been guiding me as always is curiosity. I think that is just such a so core to human value and to human creativity. And I have always been very relentlessly or even a little bit naively courageous going after curiosity, because I think that's just fun and it transcends individual, it transcends even what's in front of us. And that's a North Star. And my curiosity has always been the science of intelligence and making intelligent machines. And that has carried me very far on my journey. As that deepens, as my career of being a scientist deepens, I think another important North Star is really believing technology can be benevolent to humans. I think that conviction and optimism of believing the benevolence of technology for humans guides me towards doing things that's human-centered and have the kind of human value that I believe in. And that's just another North Star that continues to guide me.
I love that. And a lot of people who I find interesting and doing a lot of worthwhile work in the space are driven by those two things as well. The curiosity I find interesting. I'd like to just drill down into that for a second, because in today's landscape, there's so many things one could be curious about. There are new models coming out every week, new tools and that type of stuff. And can you be too curious, or how do you decide what to focus on when your curiosity can lead you everywhere?
Well, that's actually a great question. I suppose you can always be too, and then add an adjective there. So the reason I loved physics in hindsight was not just the Newtonian laws and Maxwell equations and later quantum equations. It was actually the ability to ask audacious questions. Physicists of all scientists seem to have this incredible appetite and conviction to ask the most audacious questions, such as what is space-time, the boundary of universe, the smallest particles, and then, how to unify forces. Some of these questions to this day don't have answers. I think that combination of identifying an extremely audacious question that is so hard to solve or to find answers for, plus it gives a vector direction so that you can explore in many ways. But when there is a vector direction, it's all, in the words of physics, it's almost like a field. Once you have a field, your curiosity has a direction to align with. And that's how, at least for myself, having been trained in physics, in AI, I'm drawn to audacious questions. I'm drawn to big problems that no one has solved before. And then I let my curiosity fill that journey towards that goal.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing is curiosity conditioned on a question. I joke that I'm probably a Bayesian, because you can never say you are a Bayesian. So I think in terms of conditional probabilities. Also, I totally agree about physics. And in a previous life, I was a pure mathematician, and people thought that was a bit out there. But I always said that we were always playing catch up with physicists, right? Like, they would do things mathematically that made no sense, like Dirac delta function, right? Then the mathematicians had to catch up and be like, oh, let's formalize this. So I totally agree with respect to the physics mindset as well. I'd love to jump into human-centeredness, which you spoke to, and I know is a deep concern and aspect of the work you do. So I'm just wondering if you could define or give us heuristics for how we can think about human-centeredness in the context of AI systems today and what it could mean.
Yeah, to me, again, human-centeredness is yet another North Star for AI, is that AI can be a family of technology and as well as products and services. But that North Star for me is benevolence for humanity and for individuals. So that's how I see human-centeredness. And of course, that would be guided by the values of the society we live in. And also there is in my head, I visualize 3 concentric circles for human-centeredness. The innermost is individual, that we want to create technology that helps individuals, that empowers people, that respects the dignity of people. I do a lot of healthcare work at Stanford, especially about using smart sensors to help aging population and chronically ill patients to live better and to catch these clinically relevant moments that might lead to consequences if they're not cared for. And even with that best of intention, AI technology can actually unintentionally step on boundaries that actually is questionable for our values, whether it's privacy or taking away individual agencies. So we need to be very aware when we develop technologies like this, how to keep that individual value, individual dignity, and the respect for individual in the core of this. And that's the individual layer. Then a little bigger, in the middle of the concentric circle, to me, is community, right? Groups of people come together and we form communities. And AI is a technology that can be very powerful in helping communities. For example, creators in today's Gen AI era, that they create a lot of contents. Now, generative AI now can create contents. What is the relationship between generative AI and creators? How do we empower them? I absolutely believe that we are here to augment people. We're using technology to empower people. We're not here to take away creativity. We're not here to take away what is properly belong to artists and creators. And these are the values as well as issues that we need to grapple with in a human-centered way. And last but not the least, society is AI is a civilizational technology. We now know, I think there's very little doubt now that AI's impact to our society is transformational. This has to do with jobs. This has to do with the way governments are impacted by AI. It touches on geopolitics. And how do we wrap this around? How do we work with lawmakers? How do we work with individual citizens? How do we make sure this technology doesn't tear our society apart? How do we make sure that we use the technology to increase productivity, but also to ensure shared prosperity? These are bigger societal problems that has to do with human-centered AI. So all these concentric rings of human-centeredness are critical to today's AI age.
Absolutely. And I love how you frame it of these concentric circles from the individual to communities to society at large. And I totally agree that we're seeing such a foundational and fundamental change. And I'm not the first to have said this, but I do think if development on foundation models, for example, stopped today, which it clearly won't, we'd still be figuring out for decades applications and how to use them. And I totally agree with your assessment on trying to figure out how they can help larger scale organizations work. Because my hot take, I think, is that generative AI tools at the moment are wonderful for small teams and individuals, but larger organizations haven't figured out how to incorporate them into their processes so they can actually slow them down at the moment as well. I love the examples you gave, and I'm excited to get into spatial awareness and sensor-based and perhaps IoT stuff as well. But I'm wondering if you could share a few experiences that most strongly shaped your human-centered approach to AI.
I'm an immigrant, and I think that is by itself a very profound experience, especially I moved from China to New Jersey when I was 15, and that was an extremely formative year. And in my book, I did talk about being planted into a new society with a new language and there's a new culture was extremely shocking, to an extent traumatizing, but also a very new experience for a teenager. And what I feel very grateful is that people outside of my family have given me the warmth of humanity, have shown me light of kindness and compassion. And one family I particularly mention in my book was my high school math teacher, Bob Sabella, and his family, and how they have really extended their hands out to help me, my family, help a teenager. And that kind of compassion was a seed of the most beautiful human values that was planted in me when I was young. And I also feel along the way in my career, especially early years of AI, was such a new field. Everybody was so curious. My mentors, my professors, my colleagues, and it was just a world filled with curiosity and support. And last but not the least, in my book, one person I did mention a lot is my mom, who is a very strong woman, but who is also physically quite ill for decades. And we have a symbiotic relationship on the surface. I take care of her. I'm her translator, I'm her caretaker, I'm her medical case manager. I have been through every single healthcare medical scenario, from ER to ambulance to surgery to ICU to hospitalization to you name it. On the other hand, she's also such a strong woman. She showed me the kind of conviction, especially as a mom, for my passion, right? Even in the hardest days of immigration life, especially financially and medically, she was more unwavering than me about my love for science, my passion for AI, my passion for being a scientist. And that kind of light of conviction and passion and unconditional support also instilled in me the kind of values that I care so much. So these are just examples. I think all in all, it's I have seen the most beautiful part of humanity, the compassion, the kindness, and I believe in it.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing such personal stories as well. And something, as you know, I'm back in Australia, but my dad's 85. I'm an only child, which is one of the reasons I moved back. So I can relate to a lot of these things. And this is something I reflect on. But something I'm hearing in there is this tension between the frailty of the human body as we get older and the incredible robustness and energy of the human spirit as well, and how those can be combined. And it does make sense for me now. Of course, it did anyway, but why you're particularly interested in elder care as well. So that actually brings me to another question, which is what application areas like elder care or climate do you think especially highlight the importance of the human-centered approach to AI?
Yeah, Hugo, frankly, AI is so horizontal that I genuinely believe it's almost all areas. Of course, it's very illustrative in medicine. And like you said, because of my own personal experience, I especially care about human healthcare delivery and helping the vulnerables. And whether we're talking about ambient smart sensors or future robots or just way better diagnostic and tools, these are all great areas. You also mentioned sustainability and climate. AI has incredible opportunity to help to map out our biodiversity, to understand our ocean, to model weather and climate, to also help us discover new forms of energy. 2 years ago, the breakthrough in fusion was largely a result of improvement of machine learning methods in the national labs in America. But there's also, for example, education. I'm so excited to see that education, our human education system hasn't changed, especially the system that's developed in the West, which is dominating the whole world now, has stayed the same for more than 100, 200 years now, especially the early 20th century structure of education. But the way information is encoded and transmitted and distributed has drastically changed, right? Like we now have computers, we now have internet, we now have AI. So I actually think Gen AI is really a wake-up call to education system. And this is not just K-12. At our fingertip, we have tools to do lifelong continuous learning. And that's another really important human-centered example for AI's application. I also think there are very unsexy or less celebrated examples of AI. For example, agriculture. Agriculture is actually critical for global well-being. How to make it more efficient, how to help humans to alleviate the hard labor from humans, right? These are profound changes that AI can help. And last but not least, I also want to call out government itself. Globally, every society is dealing with governments. And for governments to be more efficiently serve their people is better for everybody. And AI is a huge opportunity in terms of using technology to help serving people. And so every single industry, we can find human-centered AI examples.
Absolutely. And I love all those examples. I work a lot in education, and I think that's such a key example. And I am very excited about the future of personalized education as well, because a lot of education still has been broadcast mode, right? And not speaking to individuals. So I think that's an incredibly rich terrain that I'm excited to explore. I also love this conversation is veering towards what I would call future music, right? Because we're talking about all these applications which we're starting to discover. And what we've had so far is incredibly exciting. We've had our quote unquote ChatGPT moment. Before that, of course, we had our, for lack of a better term, stable diffusion moment, which I think is as important, although not as flashy and culturally discussed as well. But there are so many exciting things on the table, and you've hinted towards some of them, such as sensor-based technologies and even robotics and spatial awareness. So we're now just, it almost seems ChatGPT seems quaint in some ways that, oh, you can talk with software now. Fantastic. But there's so many more rich opportunities on the table. I know spatial awareness is something you think a lot and work a lot on. So I'm wondering if you could give us a brief introduction. What is spatially aware AI and why is it important?
Yeah, I'm really excited by what I call spatial intelligence. I see that as a huge part of intelligence as a whole, or whether you call it AI or AGI, because understanding 3D space and to be able to interact in it and to be able to create and innovate and do a lot of things in it is fundamental to animal intelligence, especially human intelligence, and it will be fundamental to computers and robots and virtual agents and all that. So that's the global umbrella of spatial intelligence. What's fundamental about spatial intelligence is 3D, because space is 3D. And to be able to model 3D space so that you can create worlds that are 3D, or mathematically 3D, opens doors that have not been opened. For example, any creator knows that in order to truly create, they need the kind of controllability and consistency in the process of creation, whether they're designing a furniture or interior arrangement, or creating a film, or creating a marketing material, or just having fun, or the kind of e-commerce that we're seeing. All this, the creators needs incredible control, and spatial intelligent AI can really help to democratize that technology and lower the energy barrier in creation. Another example is that so much of the global market involves interaction with different space. Of course, if you have kids, you can naturally just cite the example of gaming, and it's true, right? Gaming is extremely interactive, mostly 3D space, but there's more than gaming. You work in education, whether it's professional education or K-12 education, a lot of educational experience to understand something. Imagine teaching the kid a solar system. It will be so much easier if it's 3D. Of course, kids today in class can make physical solar system props, but that's just one example to show that if we have a digital virtualized ability, virtual worlds that we can create that's 3D to interact with, it'll open up opportunity from gaming to interactive experiences to professional training of whether it's sports or learning to be a surgeon or cooking omelet or whatever you can think of. So that's another area. Last but not the least, I'm just making 3 examples, is that we are very excited by the future of robots. And they're not just humanoid, any machine that can navigate and do things in a complex world so that they can help humans. You can call it some type of robot, including cars themselves. In order for robots to navigate the world and to be able to help doing things in the world, whether it's changing light bulbs or in a warehouse, lifting things or saving people in natural disasters, all this requires spatially navigating, understanding what's going on. And that is spatial intelligence. So all these examples tell you there's, like you said, Hugo, it's beyond language and it needs a different language. And that language of nature, that language of space is spatial intelligence and 3D representation.
I love it. And I love all those examples. There's an example. I've got a lot of friends who are architects, and this is a toy example for me, but I think it's a paradigm of this philosophy. Software in architecture took us away from being in the real world with CAD and that type of stuff, right? But the ability of AI and spatially aware AI to actually take us back into those spaces while still working with software, I think is incredibly exciting. So it's computation that allows us to once again get in touch with the real world. Again, I'm very excited with how multimodal models are developing. One example is Gemini 2.5, which I find fascinating in all honesty. And the way it isn't a classic LLM, but it has a lot of LLM capabilities, but it has, I don't know how it does it, but maybe it has some clip pre-processing or something to do image analysis and then create images. And I do wonder whether you envisage a future where there are foundation models or other forms of models that are LLMs and vision models all combined and spatially aware and perhaps robotic as well.
Absolutely. I think there is going to be foundation models that are more and more sophisticated. You know, my company, World Labs, is developing foundation models for spatial intelligence and 3D world generation. And if you are talking about one monolithic giant model that combines everything, that is an interesting way to think about it. I'm sure some people would try. It is going to be very resource intensive, especially data and compute. But that's almost like what Einstein wanted to do is to unify all the forces. It's almost has that flavor. So it's a great intellectual hypothesis. But before we get to that monolithic, giant, single brain AI, which humans do have that, we are going to see more and more different foundation models on different multimodality with a different focus.
Super cool. And I'm a hacker at heart. So something I love about the AI space is that at least recently it's made us return to Unix philosophy, modularity, composability of different models and that type of stuff, which is super fun. I am interested in, because there aren't really big public conversations around spatially aware AI yet. So I'm just wondering if you could help us think through what are some of the practical implications of spatially aware systems that you think might be underappreciated.
I think one of the most underappreciated thing is that 3D is a language that is for computing, is for programming, because we're seeing a lot of pixels being generated and they're beautiful.
Mhm.
But one of the things is that if you just generate pixels on a flat screen, they actually lack information. It's very hard to measure. The distance between two pixels on a flat screen is fundamentally different of the distance between two pixels in 3D world. And when you put them on the flat screen, there's so little compute you can do with it, right? How do you add shadow? How do you change camera angle? How do you do occlusion? How do you relight? How do you measure? How do you drop something in? How do you take something out? All this becomes really difficult. So I think once we have spatial intelligence in a true 3D sense, this will change. And I'm very excited by that.
Awesome. I am interested. I know I'm not asking for any secret source or I don't want to pry too much into World Labs because I know a lot is under wraps, but I'm wondering what you can share about your vision for large scale world modeling and what motivated the work at World Labs.
I think what motivated me are two reasons. One is I think that there's just so many use cases we already just touched on, right? From creativity to experiences and interaction to robotics to education to healthcare to manufacturing to agriculture. There's just the use cases abundant if you look at the global market coverage on media and entertainment, on gaming, on emerging technology like AR, VR, XR, and robotics. That's just exciting. In the meantime, it's also intellectually and technically exciting that the world deserves world models, and spatial 3D, spatial intelligent world models is a fundamental missing piece for the generation, for the age of Gen AI, and I see that as a great opportunity.
Fantastic. I am interested, if without going beyond anything that's already public, are there any use cases from World Labs that can help illustrate this direction?
So I think I did mention all these, right? Creativity, creator space, interactive experiences, robotics. These are all use cases.
Fantastic. So, moving on to other areas of AI, I'm wondering what developments in AI genuinely excite you right now, things that you think are moving the field forward.
I think open source excites me. I think there is a global movement now on open source, and that really fertilizes the field even further. That's one global trend I'm excited by. Another global trend I'm excited by is that the opportunity to use AI to superpower scientific discovery, and that especially can and should be happening on our campuses, university campuses, because there is, some people might have this doom and gloom conjecture that in the age of large resource of AI, like chips and data, higher education and universities have no role to play. And I actually strongly disagree, because I think higher education is where truly blue sky, curiosity-driven research continue to happen. And more pragmatically, there's just so much more interdisciplinary work that's happening, whether it's clinical medical research or biology or psychology or astrophysics or civil engineering. Any discipline any departments you mention on university campuses, you realize that AI can be a tool for them. And using AI to help those disciplines to do scientific discovery and innovation is a huge opportunity that I'm truly excited by.
I couldn't agree more. And for example, like I use a lot of agentic systems to go and do simulations for me. And like you can send out agents to do all types of stuff. And actually, I know this is something Duncan thinks about a lot and of course works in at Delphina. So Duncan, I'm wondering if you can add any color to how you think about agentic systems going out and helping us do the work.
I was actually going to ask Fei-Fei the follow-up there, which is it's clear that academia is so long-term oriented and really invested in kind of the deep progress. And in today's world, right, we have so much quick reaction on the Twitter sphere and LinkedIn. So how do you personally draw the line between real progress and in today's world and the hype?
Great question, Duncan. So first of all, my life has always been guided by North Star, and that does help me because if you understand the North Star, you can use that to measure against the hype, or sometimes you see something really incredibly real, and that's one North Star achieved, but that is always my reference system. I also think respect for knowledge and expertise still matter. Just because someone is on Twitter yelling at a global scale sometimes doesn't necessarily mean they have the deep expertise and knowledge. So I still respect where the source of the voice come from. This is actually really, and Duncan, it's a very profound question. In the age of ChatGPT, in the age of big AI, information is everywhere. How do we teach our kids or even the public to decipher information, to guard against misinformation? We haven't talked about concerns about this. One of my biggest concerns in this time, in this age of AI, is the lack of good public education. I think people, including governments themselves, for their own purposes, are speaking AI with sometimes veiled, sometimes not veiled agenda. And that has created a bit of a vacuum. Maybe that's too strong a word. Some people are trying, at least Stanford HAI has been trying, but really pretty much a vacuum of good public education, trusted, objective public education of AI. And that does concern me because you and I and Hugo might not be as vulnerable because we are deeply educated. We're privileged to live in regions of the world we can access information. But that's not true for everybody. And AI exacerbates that problem. And we need to be very careful.
That's a beautiful response. And I guess that education piece feels like a really key factor in the health of the AI ecosystem going forward. As we think about our community and our society taking advantage of AI, education is so important. I'm curious if you could speak more to what else are the key factors or key pieces of a healthy AI ecosystem and whether open source plays a part, academia. I'm curious to open that up a little bit.
Yeah, Duncan, I think as the word ecosystem indicates, ecosystem has to be multi-stakeholder. Ecosystem is more than win-win. It could be multiple wins in a healthy ecosystem. Using US as an example, right, especially in the post-World War II, the government has played more or less a relatively positive role in injecting resources into the ecosystem of both public sector and private sector to actually turn the wheel to create a healthy ecosystem of technology innovation. That's why today, all the AI advances, we see some fundamental advances from microchip to ImageNet, big data to neural network algorithms. You can trace back to decades of research. So having a healthy ecosystem is so critical. It's not only just about resourcing, it's also about people, right? A healthy ecosystem is where people get educated, where people get jobs, where people return back to the ecosystem. And that's really critical. And I'm actually concerned about that. I've been public about this because AI has accelerated so fast. Much of the resourcing now, it's not only in private ecosystem. Private company is actually concentrated in very small number of private companies. And that is not healthy for the overall ecosystem of innovation and education and a long-term health of the society.
So I love that you frame it in terms of long-term health. And I am wondering how you feel about the long view on AI. For example, we are in the early stages of AI. And I think one analogy I like, it breaks down in some places, is in the early stages of humans able to harness electricity, we didn't have a light bulb, we didn't have a grid. And Edison, I think, set up the innovation lab in order to figure out how to harness these technologies. So we are in those early stages. I am interested, when we look back on this era, do you think AI will be viewed like the internet or computers or the printing press or something bigger like fire or literacy and writing?
I think AI is electricity and computers combined. First of all, I think AI is the new compute. Anywhere there is a chip, whether it's a light bulb or it's the engine of an airplane or it's a robot or it's a fridge, anywhere there is a chip today or tomorrow, there's compute. Anywhere there's compute, there's going to be AI. AI is, from a software point of view, it's just a more intelligent form of compute. So that, to me, is very clear. I call it electricity because it's very horizontal. This computing technology empowers everybody. So it is a fundamental infrastructure that our society should provide. And we'll see how it plays out. It's very early. It used to be it's just private companies and some universities participating, but now nation states are taking very strong steps in resourcing, and every country has their own policies, but it's one of the biggest changes since 2022, really early 2023, is the incredible attention that AI has received in the policy world.
That's beautiful. Following up on that, what kind of guiding principles or heuristics do you think are most useful for technologists in navigating this crazy fast advancement in AI?
Duncan, I'm going to answer your question in two ways. One is technologists, one is actually a guiding principle for policymakers. For technologists, I so deeply believe that people like us, trained as technologists and scientists, our fundamental value is to seek truth, is to follow facts. We're not truth itself. I do worry that as AI technologists, especially as someone who is privileged to have a platform to speak, that sometimes we take ourselves too seriously as if we are truth itself. I think we have to keep that humility. We are trained to seek truth and to stay as humble as possible in the face of technology and science and humanity, and stay true to really why we started this. I started this because I was a curious teenager about how the world works, how nature works, how intelligence works. And then that continues to excite and humble me. And I think it's important because sometimes the hype of AI also creates unnecessary ego. So that's for technologists ourselves. For policymakers, I have actually publicly also written about this. I think there are principles we could follow to think as well as act thoughtfully about AI. First is science, not science fiction. I really am deeply worried when policy making or policymakers are motivated by hyperbolic science fiction stories or conjectures and make policies or laws even out of that. For example, there was a lot of hyperbolic statements about AI causing human extinction a year or two ago. And I have actually watched and cringed when I watched that global governments, important governments would be issuing policy under that premise, and that is not healthy. We need to be so respectful to data, to measurements, to scientific facts, and that is very critical for AI policy making. Second is pragmatism, not ideology. I think one of the biggest debate is how much do we regulate the upstream AI research versus downstream applications. I deeply believe by and large, we should take a pragmatic approach and look at where rubber meets the road. and pay attention to the downstream application. If we worry about healthcare AI devices, then we look at what are the current framework for this under FDA, medical devices under FDA, and update it with AI, with new AI knowledge, or whether it's finance, environment, transportation. We can update our regulatory framework with the new knowledge, but not to choke off the upstream innovation. This is almost to say cars did kill people and cause injury, but instead of introducing seatbelts and speed limit, we shut down all the car companies in the early 20th century and get back to horses. That's just not the way the society should progress. Last but not the least, in the framework of policymaking, we already mentioned, is resource the ecosystem, invigorate the ecosystem, not only allow big companies to thrive, that's important for everyone, they're large employers, they're big taxpayers for our governments, but also allow entrepreneurs, allow public sectors, and especially Blue Sky University research to also thrive, because that's for the long-term health of the society.
Thank you so much, Fei-Fei, for that, I think, wonderful sense of the type of direction we need to head in to have a more healthy AI ecosystem for all stakeholders. And I love the example of cars as well. And as we know, seatbelts were first developed made for men in trials, right? And then we developed systems which were better for everyone. But I think that example really speaks to the actual need to consider in a robust and principled manner all different people and all different stakeholders in the systems we're building, and the focus on education and the developer and open source ecosystem, but also at a policy level, and helping with public awareness around what's possible and demystifying what the hype is and what doesn't work. So I just want to say it's time to wrap up, but thank you not only for all the work you've done and continue to do over the decades, but for your generosity and wisdom in coming in and sharing your time with us and with our audience as well. So we appreciate it a lot, Fei-Fei.
Thank you, Hugo and Duncan, for your very thoughtful questions. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you,
Likewise.
Fei-Fei.
Thanks so much for listening to High Signal, brought to you by Delphina. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on YouTube, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Like and subscribe on YouTube and give us 5 stars and a review on iTunes and Spotify. This will help us bring you more of the conversations you love. All the links are in the show notes. We'll catch you next time.